If you haven't watched part 1 of the series, stop now and go watch it first. The link is in the description. You need the full context to understand just how horrific what you're about to hear really is. For those who have seen part 1, you already know 2 children vanished without a trace, and their mother, Lori Vallow, refused to tell anyone where they were. But what investigators discovered in the cell phone records and what they found buried in that quiet Idaho backyard was worse than anyone imagined. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on, because part 3, the finale, is coming soon. You do not want to miss the moment justice finally catches up with Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell. Now, let's pick up exactly where we left off. The cell phone records arrived at the Rexburg Police Department on a gray December morning in 2019. Stacks of documents, spreadsheets full of timestamps and GPS coordinates, a digital trail of movements that would lead investigators into the darkest corners of this case. Detective Ray Hermosillo spread the pages across his desk, his coffee growing cold as he traced the patterns hidden in the data. What he found made his blood run cold. On the 8th of September, 2019, the day Tylee Ryan was last photographed alive at Yellowstone National Park, Alex Cox's mobile phone told a damning story. The GPS data showed Alex leaving Rexburg in the early evening, traveling around 15 miles south to the rural community of Salem. His destination, 1994 East 450 North, the home of Chad Daybell. Alex's phone stayed at that property for hours, pinging off local mass as the sun set over the Idaho farmland. Whatever he was doing out there, it wasn't quick. Late that night, his phone returned to Rexburg, back to his sister Lori's townhouse, the last place Tylee had been seen alive. The very next day, the 9th of September, the pattern repeated. Alex's phone traveled from Rexburg to Chad's property. It lingered there for hours. Then it returned. Whatever had started the night before, it apparently needed a second day to finish. Detective Hermosillo leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. Tylee disappears on the 8th. Alex is at Chad's property that night and again the next day. The timing was far too precise to be a coincidence. Then he spotted something else. Something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. On the 9th of September, 2019, Chad Daybell sent a text message to his wife, Tammy. The message sounded casual, mundane. Chad claimed he'd shot a raccoon on their property and buried it in the pet cemetery behind the house. Tammy, at work at the time, replied with mild interest and got on with her day. A raccoon, buried in the pet cemetery. But investigators would later confirm the truth. No raccoon had been shot. No raccoon had been buried. Chad's story was a lie, a cover for something far more sinister that had just gone into the ground on his land. And the timing matched perfectly with Tylee Ryan's disappearance. The pattern repeated itself 2 weeks later, following the same terrible rhythm. On the 22nd of September, 2019, J.J. Vallow was still alive. He attended school in Rexburg that day. He joined in class activities. He played at break time. Teachers remembered him as a sweet child with autism who needed extra support, but brought joy to everyone around him. He loved superheroes. He gave out hugs freely. That evening, Alex Cox's phone placed him at Lori's townhouse on Pioneer Road, where J.J. lived with his mother and, at least on paper, with his sister Tylee, though no one had seen Tylee in weeks. On the 23rd of September, the day after J.J. was last seen at school, Alex's phone pinged once again at Chad Daybell's property in Salem. Just as before, he spent hours there. Then he drove back to Rexburg. On the surface, life went on. But J.J. never returned to school. The next morning, Lori phoned the school and claimed she would be homeschooling him. After that, J.J., the little boy with the huge smile and boundless energy, simply vanished from public view. Detective Hermosillo stared at the data until his eyes ached. 2 missing children. 2 visits by Alex Cox to Chad Daybell's property, perfectly timed with each disappearance. A strange text about a raccoon burial. A mother who refused to say where her children were. He knew exactly what this meant. Every instinct he'd built over years of police work screamed the same conclusion. But knowing and proving are 2 very different things. He needed more evidence, more witnesses. something to justify a search warrant for Chad Daybell's property, and he needed it fast before anything else disappeared. Instead, the investigation suffered a devastating blow. On the 12th of December, 2019, Alex Cox was found dead in his bathroom in Gilbert, Arizona. His new wife, Zulema Pastines, discovered him collapsed on the floor, unresponsive. They had been married only weeks. A whirlwind wedding that had puzzled everyone who heard about it. Now, she was a widow, and the man who might have held the key to this entire case was gone. Paramedics rushed in, but there was nothing they could do. Alex Cox was pronounced dead at 49. Early reports pointed to natural causes. A blood clot in his lungs that traveled to his heart. A quick death. No chance to call for help. The timing was almost unbelievable. Alex was the last known person to have been with both children before they vanished. His phone records put him at their burial site. He had shot and killed Charles Vallow just 5 months earlier. He was the linchpin of the entire conspiracy. And now he was dead. His secrets buried with him. Investigators ordered a full autopsy. They needed to know whether this really was natural or something much darker. The examination took months. Traces of an unusual substance were found in Alex's system, but in the end, the medical examiner ruled his death natural, a blood clot. Some investigators never accepted that. They believed Alex had been silenced, removed by the very people he had so loyally served. Maybe he'd become a liability. Maybe he knew too much. Maybe Lori and Chad decided that dead men tell no tales. But without solid proof of foul play, there was nothing they could do. Alex Cox was buried, his testimony lost forever. Meanwhile, Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell had vanished. When investigators went to Lori's Rexburg townhouse for further interviews, they found it empty, furniture gone, personal belongings cleared out. Lori and Chad had fled. No forwarding address. No clear trail. For weeks, law enforcement hunted for them, tracking car transactions and phone records across multiple states. Arizona, Utah, California. Each lead came up just a little too late. Lori and Chad always seemed one move ahead, drifting like ghosts across the map. Finally, on the 25th of January, 2020, investigators caught a break. A credit card charge placed Lori and Chad in Kauai, Hawaii. They'd rented a beachside condo, a luxury property with ocean views and tropical gardens. They were living in paradise, while 2 children remained missing and presumed dead. The photographs from Hawaii sparked outrage across the country. News cameras showed Lori and Chad lounging on white sand beaches, smiling, relaxed, drinks in hand. They browsed in tourist shops, looking at jewelry and designer clothes. They ate in expensive restaurants, holding hands across candlelit tables like carefree honeymooners. How could a mother do this? The question echoed across social media, in news bulletins, and in the minds of everyone following the case. 2 children missing. Several people connected to Lori dead, and she was on a Hawaiian holiday, tanning and laughing as if nothing had happened. Public pressure exploded. Prosecutors were pushed to act. On the 30th of January, 2020, a Madison County judge issued an extraordinary order. Lori Vallow was commanded to produce her children, JJ and Tylee, to Idaho authorities within 5 days. The order was absolute. She had until the 4th of February to prove her children were alive and safe. If she failed, there would be immediate consequences. The deadline came, and then it went. No children, no explanation, no sign of compliance at all. Lori simply ignored the court and carried on her Hawaiian holiday as if the law did not apply to her. On the 20th of February, 2020, Kauai police officers approached Lori Vallow on a quiet residential street near her rented condominium. The tropical breeze carried the scent of flowers as officers told Lori she was under arrest. She was handcuffed beneath swaying palm trees. Her face showed almost no emotion. The list of charges was long and damning: desertion and non-support dependent children, resisting and obstructing an officer, criminal solicitation to commit a crime, contempt of court for refusing to obey the order to produce her children. Her bail was set at $5 million, a staggering amount that reflected just how serious this case had become. Lori was extradited to Idaho. She was flown back across the Pacific to face justice in the same state where her children were last seen alive. She arrived at Madison County Jail in orange prison scrubs and shackles. The glamorous, camera-ready image she cultivated gone. But even behind bars, Lori refused to cooperate. Her lawyers issued statements declaring her innocent, claiming the charges were exaggerated, driven by politics and media hysteria. They demanded that prosecutors prove it in court. And through it all, Lori never once said where her children were. Investigators were running out of options. They had suspicious timelines, disturbing patterns of behavior, a trail of bodies. But without actual remains, without witnesses, without a confession, the case was incomplete. They needed more. They needed to break into the digital world Lori and Chad had built around themselves. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: the electronics seized during Lori's arrest. Forensic analysts spent weeks pulling data from phones, tablets, and computers tied to Lori and Chad. What they found was both fascinating and horrifying. Thousands of text messages revealed a shared belief system that had twisted itself into something monstrous. Lori and Chad had developed a private vocabulary. They talk about light and dark ratings, numerical scores they assigned to people based on supposed spiritual worthiness. If you supported their relationship and their beliefs, you got a high rating. If you doubted them, questioned them, stood in their way, you got a low rating. And then there were the zombies. Over and over in their messages, Chad and Lori talked about specific people they believed had become zombies. People whose original spirits had supposedly left their bodies, replaced by dark entities. These weren't metaphors. This wasn't playful language. Chad and Lori genuinely believed some people were no longer truly human. They believed their bodies had been taken over by demons. The implications were chilling. In their theology, killing a zombie wasn't murder. It was an act of mercy. You were freeing the body from demonic control, knocking down the building so the original spirit could be released. They had created an entire spiritual framework that made homicide sound holy. Investigators began to notice a pattern in who was labeled a zombie. Charles Vallow, Lori's fourth husband, had been branded a zombie before his death. Texts showed Lori claiming Charles's spirit had been replaced by a dark entity named Ned Schneider. In their minds, his shooting wasn't murder, it was spiritual cleanup. Tammy Daybell, Chad's wife, was also labeled a zombie before her sudden death. Chad described her as possessed and no longer the woman he married. 2 weeks later, Tammy was dead, and Chad married Lori. And worst of all, both JJ and Tylee were marked as zombies. Their own mother had apparently decided that her children's souls were gone, and that their bodies were now occupied by darkness that needed to be destroyed. The messages were effectively a roadmap to murder, disguised as revelation. Armed with this new evidence, investigators took a critical step. They decided to exhume Tammy Daybell's body. Back in December 2019, before Alex Cox's death, authorities had quietly arranged for Tammy's remains to be taken from the cemetery in Springville, Utah, where she'd been quickly buried. The original finding of natural causes now seemed dangerously naive. Her body was sent to the Utah Medical Examiner, where forensic pathologists began a slow, detailed autopsy. Months later, the results confirmed their worst suspicions. Tammy Daybell had not died of natural causes. The manner of death was changed to homicide. Evidence pointed towards asphyxiation. Tammy had likely been suffocated in her own bed while she slept. Her death had been staged to look ordinary. No obvious trauma. Just enough ambiguity to slip past an initial, casual examination. Chad Daybell had killed his wife, or had arranged for someone else to do it. Either way, he was responsible. Tammy's death cleared the path for his new life with Lori Vallow. At this point, the case had exploded into a multi-state murder investigation. Idaho authorities were still searching for JJ and Tylee. Utah prosecutors were building a case around Tammy's homicide. Arizona investigators were reopening the shooting of Charles Vallow and looking hard at the death of Alex Cox. The thread stretched across state lines, connecting deaths and disappearances in a web of calculated evil. By June 2020, investigators finally had enough to obtain a search warrant for Chad Daybell's property in Salem. The warrant authorized them to search for human remains, signs of burial, any evidence linked to the disappearance of JJ and Tylee. The date was set, the 9th of June, 2020. That summer morning began like any other, bright, still unremarkable. It would not stay that way for long. FBI agents and Rexburg police officers gathered at the edge of Chad's land as the sun climbed higher. Forensic teams set up their equipment. Overhead, news helicopters circled, streaming live pictures to a country that had waited nearly a year for answers. Everyone on that property knew. Today might finally reveal what happened to JJ and Tylee. Cadaver dogs were released, working methodically across the grounds. They checked the main yard, the outbuildings, the areas around the house. Near a fire pit behind the main residence, one dog stopped and alerted. The handler raised a hand. Excavation began. At around 18 inches down, searchers found black plastic, tightly wrapped around remains that would later be identified as Tylee Ryan. But it wasn't just a burial. Tylee had been dismembered, her remains burned. Someone had tried to erase her physically, to turn her into ash and fragments that could never be recognized. The search continued. Near a pond on the eastern edge of the property, another dog alerted. More digging, more plastic. Then the small, bound form of J.J. Vallow emerged from the Idaho soil. Unlike his sister, J.J.'s body was mostly intact, wrapped in layers of plastic and duct tape. His hands were tied. However his final moments unfolded, they were not peaceful. The little boy who loved superheroes and handed out hugs had died in terror. Chad Daybell was arrested on the spot, taken into custody as officers secured the scene. But the horror didn't end there. As forensic teams cataloged evidence and combed through the house, they discovered something that exposed the full depth of this nightmare. Hidden among Chad's personal belongings was a handwritten journal, page after page of detailed entries. When prosecutors finally read those pages, they realized the truth went even deeper than they feared. Because Chad hadn't just murdered these children, he had written it all down. He believed he was doing God's work, and he was documenting his crimes as if he were writing scripture in blood and bone.